everyone, my name is Jane Hobson, editor at PAX International Magazine. Welcome to this WTCE roundtable discussion in association with PAX International. Today, we will be discussing Meatless Meat, how the trend towards meat alternatives affects the passenger experience and what airlines are doing about it. We have four incredible panelists with us today. We have Matt Crane, Group Head of Food Solutions Global Innovation Center at SATS. And of course, Matt is also known as the founder of Monty's Bakehouse, which has been one of the WTCE exhibitors every year since 2012, since its inception. Next, we've got Sheri Whiteley with us. Sheri is Senior Manager of Product Design and Service at American Airlines. We've also got Sunbul Dubani, Director of Customer Service Insight at LSG Group, also joins us here, along with Chef Sean Wheaton, who is Vice President of Culinary Services at Cuisine Solutions. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us. I think a really great place to start would be with you, Sean, as the chef perspective. What exactly a meatless meat is, that will help set the tone for our listeners. And maybe you can discuss a little bit about what options Cuisine Solutions offers, what goes into the recipes, what dishes is this used in, and what are the alternatives?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Really happy to be included in this panel. And excited for WTCE. We've missed it the last couple of years. Meatless meats, you can kind of cover a pretty broad range of possibilities. It is any protein alternative. From a chef perspective, when we're looking at it, whether it's tofu or seitan or tempeh or some of the Impossible Burger, any of those kinds of categories can fit into that. Just egg is an egg alternative, all of the alternative milks that we see coming out on the market. And so I think meatless meat really runs a gamut of possibilities, and the explosion of options over the last few years has been pretty incredible to be a part of in a lot of ways. And it's exciting because there are a lot of opportunities for almost one-to-one replacements with the things that we see across menus: chicken, ground beef, even some other eggs, milks, like I mentioned. So there are a lot of ways to work meatless meats into existing recipes as one-to-one substitutions. And I think it's interesting to look at it as how far you want to go, right? When we're talking about things like the Impossible Burger that are really imitating meats. And I know we're going to get into this later in the discussion, but when you get into like really mimicking meats and you end up going, perhaps for some vegetarians, a little too far. My wife doesn't like the Impossible Burger because it's too much like meat. She's vegetarian, but I love it. So it's kind of like, where is that intersection of just right for the customer and where to go? We work with a number of suppliers in the meatless meat category. And our R&D team works really hard with them to maybe take some of the things you can't pronounce out of their recipes and see if we can clean it up and make it a little bit more natural in some instances. And sometimes it's just off the shelf and into a pouch with a sauce. But we also like to leave things really salt and pepper, plainly seasoned to begin with, and work with the chefs of specific hotels or airlines in this case, and see what dishes they're working towards in their menu cycles, the same as we would with a chicken product, where we're selling a chicken product and the accompanying sauce. But that chicken is the same SKU that's going through the entire year's menu cycles. It's just adding a different sauce or garnish to make it a new dish on the next cycle. So keeping things like the daring chicken nuggets as simple as we can, just waiting to be garnished, sauced, for whatever it applies to on the next menu cycle. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Okay. So then in terms of like what would go into this recipe or what dishes are used in it, because like you said, there are so many options and so many products available for that one-to-one replacement. I'm assuming that is when it comes to working with the chefs at that airline or at that at that hotel, like you said, and creating those specific dishes or recipes or menu items from that interaction?
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's or just to kind of keep to the same couple of examples for ease of discussion, working with the daring product, which is a fairly, or corn, the QUR. We work with both of those products, and on their own, they're a very neutral product. But we can, through the sous vide process and vacuum marinating, we can get a lot of flavors into those products, so we can adjust them to fit more specifically into whatever the end dish is going to be that the chefs at the airlines are trying to accomplish. The same goes for Just as an egg replacement. We have a global relationship with Just for sous vide egg replacement products, where we can do we do just egg bites, or we can do a just egg patty that would be an egg replacement in a breakfast sandwich, right? And we can do different inclusions in that, whether it's broccoli and cheese, or obviously not ham, or like a veggie bacon. We can do a lot of things with those recipes,
yeah,
to mimic what people are already expecting in a egg product.
Okay. So I'm vegetarian myself, and what you said about your wife, sometimes the similarity of, I think you had mentioned the Impossible Burger, is a little bit too close of a one-to-one, even for some of those eaters. And I know we are going to get into the trends regarding vegetarian and veganism. But one of the questions I actually had down for you, Sean, was how do these examples that you're going to give compare to the typical brands for, and let's talk maybe specifically about like a patty. Is this corn option something that could be made into, like a burger patty? Is that an example of something that would work?
So the corn specifically, they focus on poultry replacement, chicken nuggets, chicken strips, chicken breast, but it is very much a one-to-one replacement for a chicken fillet that would go into a chicken sandwich. And we're working on different iterations of that for a few clients right now, and different flavor profiles and additional coatings to get a little more crispy on the outside. So, but then there are also the beef alternatives as a patty. So we're working with some mushroom suppliers to do a more mushroom and I can't really think, all of a sudden mind went blank. Mycoprotein as a substrate for a patty.
Okay, right.
Go into the burger place.
Yeah. So Matt, in terms of the work that you do at the Food Solutions Global Innovation Center at SATS, I'm wondering about the effect that, any of these alternatives or meatless meats might have by being in a dry pressurized cabin in terms of changing the taste of it, or changing even like the appearance of it. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I can, but I'm gonna just wind back a bit and just try and characterize the different types of alternative proteins, alternative meats that are out there. So they really come from three straight pillars, right? So think of plants and the alternative proteins that derive from plants. Then you have cell-based, which is actually growing meat. So you're growing an alternative. You're trying to get the fibers into cell culture. And then you've got fermented, which is the likes of mycoprotein. That can come from biomass or precision fermentation. Okay. But if you think about it, what you're asking a plant to do is, through processing, mimic meat. That's pretty tough. That's pretty tough. So the processing that goes into it, that's where we start. Is we need to understand the science that goes into the manufacturing process. So if you took something like there's a good brand out there, which is chicken based. It's trying to make soya protein and pea protein, combination of the two, I think it is, actually replicate chicken. Well, it starts with extracting the protein out. So you end up with dust. You literally have got a handful of protein dust, and you've got to convert that into chicken. How do you do that? So then you get through, and you have to think about the process that it goes through. So this dust is mixed with water or steam or oil, and it goes through something called an extruder, a high pressure extruder. That basically is like a bit like two corkscrews working together with a steam jacket around it, and it forces at high temperature that mix that you put in there together, and the protein actually degenerates. And when it degenerates, it starts to form fibers. And at the end of it, you have a thermoregulated extruder. Think of that like a garlic press. So you're then forcing this thing through a garlic press. And out it comes as sheets in the end. And there you've got something called a textured vegetable protein. But it's still soya and pea. But what you've got is the texture. And that's a very simplified view of how these things are made, okay? So you have then done your best to convert powder to texture. But as Sean has quite rightly said, you really haven't got any taste in there. And some depending on what's gone in there, will be dark and some will be white. So some will more easily replicate a beef or a duck, and some will more easily replicate chicken, depending on what you've put through. So you've then got to work that quite hard, as Sean has said, to add additional ingredients to that to start to bring the flavor through. And that should be sort of sending triggers in people's minds around cost, because what you've done then is you've taken something, you've had to add something to get it to taste like chicken in the first place. And then you've got to then think about adding it to make it a chicken teriyaki or a piri piri. And then you've really got the same challenges that you would have with a normal meal, we found at that point, to then get it right at altitude, to try and think about umami ingredients that you're using. And you just learn through experience to be able to work with that substrate that has gone through that process to then get you that taste on board. So you won't get away with obviously adding the ingredients you did last time to chicken, genuine chicken. You're adding it to extruded protein, extruded soya or pea protein at that point. So you just got to work it in a different way. So for chefs, this is paradise, because what you're doing, I think, is you're working with something that's new, and therefore you're trying to actually just work out what it can do, what it can't do. And then for aviation, you've just got to have that mentality back again to try and actually think about how it will work upstairs, as we call it.
And I mean, is that something, like, would it be accurate to say that that's something that SATS is doing right now at the Innovation Center? Like, is testing those things out and testing the recipes and the flavors and seeing how it works upstairs? Is that something that you guys are doing with any of your alternative products right now?
It is, but I'm not going to steal Sunbul's thunder either, because there's some very, very interesting adoption stats around this. So I really love the way that you did on your intro that was sent to us to say, these alternative proteins are now becoming mainstream. It's gone from a trend to being mainstream. Yeah, well, hang on a second. And you talk about in the intro, by the end of this decade, it's going to be 160 million. I think it's actually going to be 140 million from this research that I've looked at. But then you have to think about how big the meat market is. So at 160 million, that is 1% of a $1.5 trillion meat market. So I then sort of present that back and say, is that mass adoption? Well, where is it mass adoption? And then you say, well, where is it? The US, the UK, Europe. The answer is yes, it's being picked up. And that's where the brands are getting resonance and penetration that are in the supermarkets. That's where I'm pretty sure where Sean talks about chefs adopting the brands. I bet you that's in the West. I doubt it's in Asia. Yeah. So when you look at the stats, you'd say, well, 1 in 2 people in the UK have tried it. 39% of people in the US have tried it, but it doesn't even hit the research radar in Asia, because Asia is still adopting meat. So this presents dynamics around how you use this and where you use it. So it's an interesting one from that perspective. So we're more interested in whether is now the time. Should we be really, really doing the development for aviation? If we are, where will it work and where won't it work, and how could you introduce it? And that's where the airline and the caterer has to work together to decide whether the timing is right.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm sorry, Sean, go ahead.
I just wanted to interject. I think that you bring up, and this, we could have a whole nother speaking panel about this, and the adoption of meatless meats, because so many of the traditional meatless meats, the tofu and seitan and those things, came from Asia. So there's not the stigma around them in other parts of the world that there is in the West. Growing up, my mom trying to force tofurkey down, there was it took me a while to come back around to the vegetarian substitutions, where I don't know that you face the same uphill battle in other parts of the world. So that's just an interesting point to think about when we're talking about adoption globally.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think that this definitely covers, what is required of these products for upstairs for in-flight. So Sunbul, I think following on what Matt and Sean have both just said, this would be a perfect time to maybe share some of those stats or share some of those trend insights with us from this customer insight perspective that you have.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. And yeah, it was so many interesting things already said. And we are seeing now developments and we don't really know. And those developments are in a parallel streaming. Yeah. And we really don't know which one will be faster or which one will be stronger. And it's very important to watch this very closely. One stream I think we have all seen around the globe is through the pandemic that a lot of people strived for a more healthier lifestyle. And I think this is also something that accelerated, or we can see, it's not I think, we can see that has accelerated. And here I would like to say, Matt, you're right, in some countries that the meat substitutes have risen and also here, Sean, what you said, that your wife doesn't really fancy the Impossible Burger. The target groups here are, well, that's what studies in middle part of Europe says. The target groups here are more the flexitarian. They eat during the week those meat substitute things, and on the weekend they just have their, let's say, a little bit better steak. This is for the area. So I think the healthier lifestyle is something that we wanted to boost our body to be more strong against COVID-19. And on the other hand, also you also addressed it, the more thoughts, not about only my health, but also the health of the planet. So what we know what let's say too much beef intake can harm, and so we maybe look for poultry, which is less harming, or we even go to more plant-based, and we eat those plants who can reduce CO2. This has started, and we see also on packaging in the supermarkets, for instance, in some countries. We see the impact of they're labeling no CO2 or and so on. So if we look 5 years back, we didn't see this on a package, but this has now started that brands are talking about this. I'm not only talking about their own ingredients, but also what the impact has on planet. So it's a complex thing. And I think we have to be very aware and of where the world is going now. And I think that the topic of sustainability is now in the top topics in the minds, not only of the consumers, let's say the passengers. They don't want to sit in front of something like the plastic thing we had already years ago. We have learned that now, and this will continue. This will continue in this direction. And just maybe one last question, one last point is it's always about choices. And I think if we think of who is sitting in the plane, and Sheri, you know better than I do, who is sitting in the plane? It's such a heterogeneous group of people with all those classes already, all the different occasions why they are traveling, with whom they are traveling, with kids, with husbands, with I don't know whom. And so the needs are so different. And this is something we have to solve in the airline catering, because we are not a restaurant up there, partly yes, but we cannot give those choices. And that's why it's a question of replacement and all these things. And so I think choice is still something, and what is very important for the passenger, he himself or she herself, they want to take a decision, and
Right. They want that choice. So Sheri, following on what Sunbul had just said, I'm curious to know who is sitting in the aircraft cabin. What are you seeing in terms of mass adoption of this trend, we'll call it? And I also think this would be a good time to maybe share what are those options that American has right now, or its partners, for the passenger in the cabin.
So for us, it is, well-being is very important for our onboard customers, sustainability, and kind of restorative energy. And so for the last couple of years, if we go back before the pandemic, we always kind of think about things in terms of pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, we did offer a couple of different options for meatless meat. We had some pasta sauces that contained those items. And one of the struggles that we had with it was simply customers being educated about what those options are. Our struggle has been when it looks exactly like meat and behaves exactly like meat, especially in a bolognese sauce that we used it in. It was confusing for our customers as well as for our crew on board to really educate customers about what that item is. And it drove a lot of questions about what is the content of that? Is there a known ingredient there? And so what we have found now, kind of in today's world, I think that, the point about customers being a little bit more educated and perhaps more aware of their diet, the pandemic definitely did elevate that. I think we now feel like our customers are more educated about meatless meat, but they definitely want them to be recognizable. Right, they want to know what the ingredients are and that there is not a list of 25 unknown agents. It really needs to be something that is a bit more recognizable. So we have had success with black bean burgers, something where you can very much speak to it. That's been a lot more successful than a sauce for us, where we struggled a little bit to educate our customers and our crew. But we still have a slower adoption than we would like. A recent customer survey for us, choice is definitely very high on the list of things customers want in their onboard dining experience. But when we asked about vegetarian options, for us, that's still in the 3 or 4. That's not making it in the top couple. So we struggle with finding what is that right opportunity. And what we believe the answer is making it something that you decide to select, right? That we give the customers the ability to pre-order options that are meatless options, and that may be the Impossible Burger or something along those lines. That seems to work better versus when there's only 2 choices on board. There's not a customer menu. It might be a little bit more challenging to recognize what it is. That can be a little bit harder for us to execute upon, and doesn't necessarily drive customer satisfaction. It drives customer wonder. Our customer base now post-pandemic, we have more leisure customers than we have business customers still, right? We are not even at the 50-50 mark yet, right? It's probably more like 60% leisure and 40%. And when you are on a leisure trip, you want to indulge a little bit more. And that's what we seem to find, right, with those customers, is they want to make that decision to have the ice cream sundae, have the real hamburger. And so we're constantly trying to find that balance. We find that more of our business customers are interested in maintaining their diet, maintaining their well-being on board, and they may choose the meatless options more than leisure customers.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like that even speaks a little bit to what Sunbul had said about that kind of flexitarian profile, where, maybe it's somebody who eats those meat alternative options throughout the week, but then when they are in that leisure mindset or heading out on vacation or what have you, then that would be a time where they would choose to indulge, like you said. Before we move on, I just want to know, because Matt had explained earlier the process to us, and I saw Sean kind of nodding his head throughout the explanation, and the associated cost that goes into the process. Can you speak at all, Sheri, about that price point on board? And the other thing I'm wondering too, I would assume that in economy class there are these options as well for these like leisure travelers. So I'm just curious about how does that price point look to the passenger, or where would they see that add on?
It is a little bit more expensive to provide these meatless options. You are absolutely right. We do have the opportunity within our budget usually to afford that. For us, we would just make an adjustment someplace else, right? We do think it is very important in today's world of inflation. Everything, it seems to be a little bit more expensive. So we do find a way to balance that. I will say for now, we have stopped short of offering too many of these meat alternatives in the main cabin. They are mostly in our premium cabin. Our premium economy is where we provide that. The idea that we're toying with now is, can we give that option on our longer haul flights, but allow it to be something that you pre-select? We have used pre-order for almost a decade now, and we have a lot of success there. And we think in the economy cabin, it makes sense for you to pre-select that choice ahead of time versus having it as just one of your standard options. And so we have stopped short of doing that on our international long haul flights for now, but definitely something that will happen before the year is over.
I was wondering about that because I remember I had made a note about that at one point during the discussion, because I remember growing up having to basically RSVP for my flight, whether you wanted the vegetarian or the kosher or the chicken or you had choices that you had to reply when you were on a longer flight. That was some time ago, but going back to that pre-selecting what you want on your flight. Exciting to hear that might be an option.
We do it with special meals.
Yep.
Yeah, if you have a special diet, but I almost feel like if you want to make that choice, that should be an option for you as well, right? Not just if you're, as you said, kosher, vegetarian, non-dairy, whatever the option may be. That's the idea that we're toying with, is having it just be something else that you can pre-select.
Right. Matt and for Sean as well. What is, maybe like you said, it's similar to actual or genuine, I think you had called it genuine meat products. But what is the shelf life for something like this that Sheri would maybe have in the cabin on board?
I'm going to make a generalization, but a statement. I actually don't think shelf life is an issue here, because I think the way that aviation supply chains work, they're that quick. It's that just in time. These ingredients have got good life. So once you've cooked them and you've actually taken them up to temperature and you've got to that critical kill point in the process anyway, and you bring it down, as long as you're then working through your safety supply chain, and aviation is very, very food safety conscious. It's got to comply with those constraints, and I don't really see that as a problem. So Sean will come in and I'm sure might have a different point of view, but the way we look at it in our supply chain, the way we're working, that's not really an issue. Cost is more the issue for us.
I won't argue with any of those points. I think inherently the way the process is in airline catering creates very safe food. The products by themselves naturally have a pretty good shelf life. And from a cuisine solution standpoint, once they go through the sous vide process and we're adding flavor or moisture or whatever we're doing to them to get them to what the airlines are looking for as our customer, from a supply chain standpoint, we're adding, our standard is an 18-month frozen shelf life, 10 days once it's defrosted, and 3 days out of the pouch. So even if it's that last minute catering order, you pull it out and it's ready to go. It's ready to eat. There's no additional processing needed. But again, you have 3 days from when you put put it in a tray to get it on the plane. Nobody wants to sit on a tray of food for that long. Everything else on the tray is going to be an issue, but these are not going to be the thing that that creates a supply chain issue on that last minute.
Okay, that's great. To hop back over to the trends then for a minute, we've heard Sunbul, even from Sheri, kind of reinforcing the flexitarian idea. I'm curious to go back and discuss that idea that Sean and Sheri have just kind of spoken about there, the role of dietary requirements or preferences, because I know for me, vegetarianism is not a requirement, but a preference. So I'm curious to know what role those play, as well as cultural and religious factors. We also spoke earlier about how some of those more traditional alternatives, I think the options or the examples given were tofu and maybe seitan, in Asia regions, are a little bit more adoptable than the other alternatives. So what role do all of these different factors play specifically in, bringing more of these meat alternatives into the airline cabin and the airline industry, I guess, as a whole?
I think we already do this since a long time, maybe not talking so much about it or being so much aware about it. But if we look at our culinary teams, all of us, we have culinary teams. We have global culinary expertise. We have Indian chefs who cook the most delicious vegetarian Indian dishes. We have the Middle Eastern, where we have a very fresh Levante cuisine. We have the Asian, and so on and so on. So there is a lot already there in the traditional, in the tradition, culinary tradition, and we also see how chefs are taking these traditional recipes and twisting it with a modern it's a modern twist, an X factor putting here and there. So there is already a lot out there, and I think looking into this very deep, and Sean, if I have understood you right, you are doing this, of course, also like our chefs are doing that. So I think we have to look into what is already there, and we have to be very open to what is out there as new forms. And we also see that for some of our customers, where we, for instance, included a meat substitute, was something very simple. People really prefer the not the meat substitute dish, but the dish with the grilled vegetables and the things you really could see. It's the grilled paprika, the grilled zucchini, and so on and so on. So I think it's very important, and industry is looking into this. What will the future bring? The cell-cured meat, the whatever meat, the plant-based meat, and so on. It's very, very important to look in what is already there, and also what is also we can deal with local products, which is also something which comes more into the sustainability focus then. And we also know that a lot of people, eating is kind of also like a religion. I'm exaggerating now, but and it's kind of a thing I want to identify myself with. So it's cool if I have a dish that I know, and maybe there is a little twist in it, and say, oh, I love that dish, and this is a surprise with it, and now I can experience it in a new way. So I hope this does answer your question, but I think that, we have to go many ways, and all those are, as already said, in parallel.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
I want to come in there because I think Sunbul's leaning on something which is quite important, because when you end up with a new form of food emerging, or a new category, adoption is key, and buying into that adoption is what we're looking for. And the decisions around how we use it commercially and when we decide to use it, we're always looking for that hockey stick. And I think what one needs to think about, and as well as the consumer, is the economics. At the moment, you've got a lot of startups that are putting a lot of money, private equity money, into these brands to pull them through. But what they are doing is they're collectively educating consumers, and eventually that'll get to some form of adoption. And that's when you then get to a genuine, mass adoption. But we've got some really interesting macroeconomic things going on in the world, like there's a cost of living crisis. Meat is only going to go up in terms of that supply chain. So going back to the point Sunbul made around making local, and these guys who are in these alternative protein markets, they're all in a race to bring the cost of their ingredient down to meat or below. And then it gets interesting. Then it gets really interesting, because it starts to then get commercially viable. And if there's then the sustainability story behind it, and the sustainability is only going to grow in consumers' minds, then we might get to a point where actually adoption is very, very rapid. And that's what the private equity money is banking on, is that these things come together in some way, and mass adoption becomes logical and encouraged, actively encouraged, as a way of us all helping the environment. That's probably a few years away, but somewhere along there is the answer to this actually finding itself to being mainstream, in my view.
Right. So one of my questions for Sunbul, and that actually I think we've covered, and I think everybody essentially has weighed in on, but was that question of, how is this increase, or suggest maybe visibility is a better word, or education about these meat alternatives? How is this in line with other trends? And the one that I had immediately thought of, probably more of from the consumer perspective, was environmental trends. So Sunbul had mentioned sustainability, but Matt, I think that you bring up an excellent point in terms of like what's going on in the world economically is a huge one that can't be ignored. Sunbul, Sheri, or Sean, did you guys want to weigh in terms of this alignment with other trends?
So I just wanted to add, so we already mentioned the environmental aspect. This is, I think, something very important. And also something which is very important is this health thing, which we experienced as a body boost in the past. And I think what is also very important is, and this is, I think, what also Matt said, trying to get this in a local. So this also would then come into the environment. So most of the trends are interlinked with each other. So it's not only that you have one trend, but they are all interlinked with each other. And also one trend is something which is now more from the consumer perspective, maybe. It's a story that is share-worthy. I'm eating less meat. I post this on Instagram or wherever. Oh, I've eaten this fantastic whatever on the airline brand XYZ. Yeah. So there comes a lot of aspects, and also this of mindfulness. I'm mindful about my planet. I take care about not only my health but also the surroundings, and this makes me this makes me a bit better person. Yeah.
Right.
And there are so many things that are linked to it.
Right. Yeah. I think the idea, as Sheri had mentioned earlier too, about people who are comfortable back in the cabin, who are going on vacation maybe for the first time since the pandemic, I think also that really contributes to that share worthiness, right? Like, here I am back in the cabin, here I am making these decisions. And I feel like there is a demographic for sure where everyone kind of thinks that they're an influencer or a micro influencer. And so I think the share worthiness of those, of that decision making along the passenger journey, I think definitely does contribute to the trendiness of it, in terms of it just being like that particular trend of the the influencer idea or content creator. So very interesting. Thanks, Sunbul. So I'll just open the floor if there's anything that you guys want to add before we wrap up, or if you feel like, you know, there's something really pressing that we haven't really touched on yet.
I think the only slight nuance on ingredients that I would add, and I don't know whether Sean's found this as well, you've got to be quite careful around, as you would be with any ingredient, around what the ingredients are that have gone in to make it. So we've come across some really, really stellar, beautiful alternative proteins in a particular sector, but we cannot use them across an airline on a broad network basis, because that ingredient doesn't comply with that particular region or country. In other words, the level that it's in that ingredient in Asia, for example, is not acceptable to the US or the EU, for example. So you're out, even though it's exceptional and it's used down here. So it's not like it's meat, so it can go everywhere. It's not like it, so again, you've just got these other little bits of complexity that are in there as well. So that's something else that, you know, we didn't expect to find that, but we found that by then just looking at these things individually. I don't know whether Sean's found the same, but
For sure, yes, definitely. We found the same thing across the meatless meats, but across a number of our products, because we sell to airlines around the world, and we operate with hotels and restaurants around the world. So, and we have production facilities in the US, France, and Thailand, and sales in the Middle East. So navigating the complexities of what's allowed to go to different regions and what's accepted in different regions was kind of already part of Cuisine Solutions DNA of digging into the ingredient statement. And that kind of flows into the rest of the trends discussion. Is you have a lot of our customers that we work with stateside as national restaurant chains that have very specific ingredient statements and no-no lists of what they want to bring into their restaurants. And while there are some intersections, there's a lot of ways where this company has a mile-long no-no list, but it's different than this other company that has a mile-long no-no list. So what we do and how we process things to achieve what those different customers are looking for, or what those different regions are looking for. But I think in general, the process that we go through is looking at that initial ingredient statement from a supplier and saying, well, what does this thing do? And can we substitute it with something that maybe doesn't have quite so many syllables and is more recognizable, right? So getting into more of the functionalities of natural starches instead of using gums and that kind of thing, and putting things into the ingredient statement, substituting things in the ingredient statement that are more customer friendly and that can be more easily communicated. And that's a big part of what my innovation and R&D team does, is pull apart those ingredient statements with the supplier and say, what does this do? Can we substitute it with something? What is the function here? How can we change the process, or how can we process it on our end to eliminate the need for that? Is there something that we can do in a time, temperature, pressure situation to eliminate the need for that ingredient? Vacuum marinating to add moisture instead of adding palm oil or whatever is something that's frowned upon in certain areas. So there's a lot of opportunity, and it is really exciting to work with a lot of these startups that are a lot of scientists, and they're looking at the functionality of everything on the shelf and coming up with some really incredible products, and then kind of working from a scientist to chef interaction and saying, okay, so how can we get this to something that's customer facing and going to be widely adopted at some point? So it's a fun project and a fun environment to be in.
Right. Yeah, everyone seems very passionate, whether it's like the trends or the airline experience or the chef experience. So I really appreciate all of the education and knowledge that I have gained from everybody today. Before we leave, I want to thank everybody who tuned in to watch this. And I also want to give a special thanks to all of our panelists. We really appreciate your time. So today we had with us Matt Crane, Group Head of Food Solutions Global Innovation Center at SATS. We had Sheri Whiteley, Senior Manager of Product Design and Service at American Airlines, Sunbul Dubani, Director of Customer Insight at LSG Group, and Chef Sean Wheaton, Vice President of Culinary Services at Cuisine Solutions. Thank you so much to each of you. My name is Jane Hobson. I'm the editor at PAX International Magazine, and we look forward to seeing everybody at WTCE.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.